Hello, I'm Ben McKecken from Hope Mornings with Laura from Hope Afternoons. And
Hello.
Laura, episode 5 of season 5. How'd you find it?
Yeah, I feel like we've started to get into the bit where they're really trying to expand out the story of the Bible as we know it and then add in a bit more extra, a bit more depth to the characters, because what they're doing in this episode, I feel like is similar to what we touched on in the last podcast, where we're talking about how I feel like they're really trying to go over the elements of history and really establish what was the leadership like at the time. This is what Passover actually would have involved. Like, they're giving us a history lesson as much as a story about Jesus and his disciples. But I feel like we're switching, probably in this season as a whole, but particularly in this episode, you really start to feel that switch of you are expanding the biblical narrative, not necessarily in a negative way, but I'm starting to have more moments where I go and Google, did that happen? Have I missed a chapter? And realizing, oh no, that's them expanding characters.
Are you doing that more than you have in even other seasons?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot more. And it's one of those moments where I have to check my own knowledge of the Bible, which I feel like actually, as we've done following The Chosen, that's definitely been something that I've done, which is probably, it's a helpful experience. The way watching this show makes you just double check that you know what you know, or that you think you read what you thought you read. But I'm definitely doing that more than I have been over the series so far.
One of the things we've talked a lot about in this season, and we're both loving, and it'd be interesting to see if you're still loving it, is the Last Supper being used as this framing device that starts off every episode. And again, it happens here. What I'm getting slightly frustrated or confused with, Laura, is some of the choices around the order of information. So one of my favorite parts of the Bible, if you can have a favorite, Laura, one of my favorite parts is John 14:17 that covers the Last Supper. And just as we're watching these episodes, trying to think back and then looking at my Bible to see which way all of this went as is recorded, because in The Chosen, and this episode is a great example, it jumps in at a point where it's making me a little bit confused as a viewer, because I thought we'd already covered this, but then no, we haven't. Well, at least according to The Chosen. And what we're talking about is the disciples responding to Jesus' statement that one of you is going to betray me. And as we've mentioned in previous episodes, and if you've been watching the season, you've seen already that Judas has reacted to that and left the Last Supper. That happened in episode 3 or episode 4. Here we are in episode 5, and now we're dealing with the reaction to this, including Judas being in the scene.
I'd really love to watch the Last Supper in order. Like, if they got all of the bits of the Last Supper over this season so far, and then could you just give it to us chronologically so that we could understand what's happening? Because I'm with you. It is a little bit of a strange, or it's an overly repetitive mechanism, I suppose. Like, there's something useful to using it as an anchoring point and kind of touching back on some of the conversations that the disciples are recorded to have had, and then those that we imagine that they have as The Chosen shows it. But I tell you what, I kind of had one of those moments where I was getting a little bit annoyed about the repetition of the Last Supper. And then, like sometimes happens when you're reading a passage of scripture, or like this moment in devotionals where you go, oh, hang on, maybe that's a bit of a self-check, because it kind of became symbolic a little bit. Like, the idea of returning to the Last Supper and thinking about Passover, thinking about Jesus' death and resurrection and communion. Wait, isn't that what we're always supposed to be constantly returning to and constantly coming back to in faith? Like, that should be the constant reference point, the constant anchor point of our faith. And I found it kind of funny as I was sitting there going, it's kind of annoying me that they keep going back to the Last Supper. Oh, whoops. We're always meant to come back to the Last Supper. That's what our faith should sort of, kind of hinge upon in some respects. And I don't know, I wondered if that was an intentional device, or if that was just me going, well done, The Chosen. You've actually added a little bit of extra spiritual depth than maybe you meant to.
I feel less rebukes, Laura, because I'm still enjoying the fact that they're spending so much time on the Last Supper. It's more the order in which the information is coming. But let us know how you feel about this device. It's a very strong overarching device being used in this season. But as we're talking about already, Laura, it's not just a device. We are talking about the last time Jesus was with his disciples en masse and sharing so much about who he is and what he's doing. Send us your comments on YouTube, on Spotify, hopepodcast.com.au. Let us know how you're going with the Last Supper, coming back to this season. But using it in this way, Laura, evidently for this episode, sets up where we're going across the whole episode. And I particularly like the final discussion, which links nicely back to where it starts, with the disciples reacting to Jesus saying, one of you is going to betray me unto death, which is a pretty intense thing. And I've thought previously about what did the disciples make of that? There isn't that much recorded in scripture about that. So I can see why The Chosen is taking us in that direction. But before we take off in that direction, Laura, before we even get to the final moments of this episode, anything else for you standing out along the way? Or perhaps you felt, I don't know, slightly rebuked by or confused by?
Where did I go? Well, I think a couple of things that stood out to me were the fact that this seemed to be the episode where, yes, they focus on the Last Supper, but also when Jesus curses the fig tree, that comes back in this episode as well, and why it was something Jesus decided to do. The disciples learning a little bit more about what is not just a theme in this series, but really one of the points of Jesus' life, where he's constantly talking about, what looks like it's bearing fruit, what looks like it's good, but then what isn't. And that scene where he's talking to the disciples and says, does that remind you of anything? And they suddenly go, oh, like the temple, that's the temple, like where it's got the appearance of good, but it's not necessarily actually, bearing anything good or bearing fruit. And then that ties in with Jesus' pushback against the authorities and the powers of the time. It ties in with the pushback against the Pharisees and everything. Like, I found this episode was really trying to like dwell on that, which I enjoyed as well. And the way they gave context to his parable about like moving mountains and that sort of stuff. Like, again, we constantly say the strength of The Chosen is how they bring reality to these things. And I think when you're imagining Jesus, when you're able to see him walking along with his disciples, with mountains on either side, surrounded by that kind of naturescape, looking at the fig tree directly, it gives you that more visceral sense of what it would have meant and what he was meaning by these sorts of things that we kind of can just overlook in scripture.
Yeah, the fig tree, the cursing of it has confused people like since Jesus did it, including the disciples at the time. I thought The Chosen, the handling of it was pretty solid. And also, you're right, in the context of where The Chosen's up to and what it's displaying, not just about the disciples or the religious leaders, but beyond that, what people's other people's reactions are to Jesus, but also to God, and whether you say you're for God, but you give the appearance of that, but on the inside, actually not so much. So all of that, I think, is fitting in nicely into an episode which, Laura, I'm struggling a little bit to come up with memorable, notable moments. I'm not saying that you have to. It's just that there are other episodes that when you speak with someone about The Chosen, they'll remember this sequence, or they'll remember when we found this, or whatever it might be. This one, and we've mentioned this on the podcast before, and this happens in TV shows because it has to happen, which is in the middle of a season or towards the end of it. At some point, you're going to have to get episodes that are much more like a bridge from here to there. They're an episode where they're giving you much more explanation, background, setting up whatever they are going to set up. I'm still enjoying that. And like you've mentioned, I'm enjoying not just the history and the background and bringing that to the fore and helping us to understand things like Passover and like what happened in Jerusalem at the time. But also the religious leaders are still getting quite a lot of look in, as well as the Roman rulers. But The Chosen team, I think, continue on a very helpful, and as much as they're going outside the Bible, not too far out of the Bible, track of helping us to think through what was going on for all of these different elements, factions around Jesus. And especially as we're talking about heading towards Jesus' death and the plot to kill him. I think that has been coming up again in this episode for me quite helpfully in terms of wherever we're getting to next.
Yeah, they're really starting to build toward that. And it's interesting, I wonder, I know there's not that many more episodes to go of this season, but I feel like potentially ahead of us are a few more bridging episodes, because in the timeline of the show, like the storyline, the part of the storyline they're up to right now, it's not that long before Jesus is going to be arrested and led to crucifixion, but we still have a few episodes in front of us. So I go, what are you going to do to fill the time between where you are right now and where you're going to, when in terms of the timing that they are in scripture, doesn't feel like there's that much time in front of you. So I'll be curious to know what they do with that. But also, as you said, it doesn't feel like this episode has these like really big scenes in it necessarily, or these big kind of moments. But I think it's got a few little bits that sort of stand out to you along the way with that read between the line depth. So there's this moment where the disciples are talking about, it's one of the exchanges they have where they're just realizing Jesus is going to die. Jesus is going to be crucified. This is something coming. How do we all feel about this? What are we doing? And I can't remember which disciple says it in the scene, but one of them talks about how like Jesus is the Messiah. If Jesus is who he claims to be, he can stop this. It's not going to happen. We can all come down. Like Jesus can, like they kind of get hooked on the words where it's like Jesus has said he is going to be sort of discovered and taken essentially, led to crucifixion, but caveat, does that mean he's actually going to get crucified? Because it could mean that something happens to stop it. And I think that was something I found really relatable. It touches on something that's quite relatable for those of us watching. So for a lot of people, when you think of Christian faith or questions you might have about God, a lot of it can come back to he can do anything, he is all powerful, but why doesn't he? And you wrestle with that thing of like, God can heal this or God could change that situation, but why doesn't he? And it's the first time it's ever crossed my mind that I can think where I realized, well, Jesus experienced that very thing himself, because we know there's moments where Jesus is seeing what's coming down the line, and even later in scripture says, ask God, like, if this cup can pass from me, but if it can't, let your will be done sort of thing. Even in Jesus's own thing, like Jesus is going to face crucifixion. He could prevent it and he doesn't. Like Jesus knows exactly what it's like to go through that thing of this could not happen. I'm all powerful to make it not happen, but I'm going to allow it to happen because obviously in this situation, what's on the other side is resurrection and there's something bigger in it. And it was the first time I kind of took that away from this whole part of scripture and Christian life going, wait, it's not just us that is like, God could do something and he didn't. God could have stopped Jesus' crucifixion and didn't, but there was reasoning behind that. And I thought, well, maybe in our own situations, there's bigger reasons why God doesn't than we necessarily grasp.
Wow, that's a pretty awesome revelation from an episode that sounds like we like, but we're not as like gushing about as some other previous ones. And we'd love to bring you into this conversation as well. All your thoughts, feedback, this episode, wherever else you're up to in The Chosen, particularly how it strikes you and where it's resonating with you, like just Laura shared. So share that with us. We would love to share that in an upcoming episode. Laura, similar things were going on for me in and around that same scene. And also, can I just note for the record, I'm getting a little bit annoyed by the music in The Chosen. I like the music, but I'm finding it distracting because often the choice of composition to me doesn't seem to be matching what's going on in the scene. I think it's the style of music, not so much like the actual the notes, the melody itself, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah.
I'm starting to like really, can you just dial it back, or can we have less of it, please? And as you just mentioned before, it's almost annoying in itself to notice that we're up to this point in a season, and because we know where the story ends, and because we know how, relatively speaking, not that much time there is to go with Jesus on this earth, that you're starting to think, oh, how's The Chosen going to do it? I didn't do that much in the first couple of seasons because you're still at that point, oh, you could stretch this out for a whole long time. Now we're at this point. Why I'm raising this is because that sort of stuff's going on watching The Chosen, a TV show. But then as you just mentioned, there are bigger things that we can connect with and can consider, and that can actually hit us in our soul. And I found the scene that you're talking about with the disciples, and as they're talking about, can we take him literally? What does he mean? What is going to happen? He could stop this. John in that scene, I really, really liked. There was an earlier sequence where John, towards the start, where he was looking so concerned and wary and all the emotions, was a great moment in this episode. That one does stand out to me. The visual depiction of someone being inwardly challenged, that's a polite word, about whether I'm going to betray the Messiah or not. And then fast forward to the end of the episode, John saying, look, he said it before, he said it clearly. I'm not sure actually why we're having this conversation, because he has it's not like he hasn't told us, but also why wouldn't we take him at his word? Which is as confronting as that word is, and as much as you don't want that word to happen, he has actually said it. But then, Laura, we head into Judas and his response to this. And we might want to hold this for the next episode because, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched ahead the episode, you should, because that episode is much more about Judas. And Laura, it gets into speculation around Judas's thinking when it comes to his reaction to where Jesus is at and what's happening for him.
Yes, I want to say two quick things about this. One is that I think George Xanthus, who plays John, this season is really shaping up to be a really strong season for him. Like, when you say that and you're talking about the emotion of it, it made me realize how much George's portrayal of John has been standing out, and the way that he reflects the emotion of certain instances and the conversations that he's having with Jesus. And maybe it's just because George is Australian and I'm like, yeah, like go the Aussie in the cast. But I also think too, I feel like he seems much more present in all of it, and there's just sort of a new dimension to the way he's bringing John to life. So I'm absolutely loving that. And funny that the music is annoying you, because what is annoying me is the accents, the mix of accents on this show. Like, you've got some people who are doing we're trying to be people who authentically live in first century Jerusalem. Then you have random British accents. Then you have some kind of collection of American ones. I'm like, what are we doing? And the accents are bugging me.
Have you started to notice that because there's more cast members on screen, do you think? I'm casting my mind back to earlier seasons, and there was a grab bag of accents. It was more, I thought it was more universal, the sort of first century Jerusalem speaking English accent. And yes, it has expanded. The vocabulary has expanded of accents across the time. But is it to the point where you're noticing it to the point where it's, like ruining?
It is distracting.
Sullying your experience?
It's definitely distracting me, because I'm starting to find Pontius Pilate especially, he is annoying me so much, but I'm kind of like...
But he's meant to be annoying.
He is, and that's why I think it's okay, because you are being the character you're supposed to be, but it's just such... I think it's because the mix of accents are so distinct from each other, and then... Obviously, we've just decided, to just roll with this, because they've obviously decided we don't need this to seem totally authentic and have all of the different accents. Let's just go with what we're going with. But I don't know. It just is a choice that seems to be a little bit noticeable in a bad way for me at the moment. But I might get over that. I might change my mind later.
I think all this, Laura, keeps going back to The Chosen is a TV series, so we're going to have different responses to all sorts of elements of it, including the production. But then, as you especially have noted as we talk about this episode, we also have inner reactions to what's going on in terms of the content, the material, the messages, all that kind of thing. So it's always a pretty fascinating endeavor to talk about The Chosen, which I'm not saying it's unique among every TV show ever, but it does set itself up very nicely for talking about all sorts of aspects of screen entertainment, including I'm not sure about those technical choices, or that one's irritating. Or, wow, I was really struck by how the disciples were trying to work out how they thought and felt about Jesus saying he not only is going to go to death, but one of you is going to betray me. I have thought about that previously, but having it depicted on screen, and there's basically silence on this in the Bible. So having someone trying to imagine what that would have been like, I found so helpful for also trying to further imagine what would that have been like. like that's an extraordinarily painful and confounding moment in existence, let alone being part of it. And I felt like The Chosen actually helped me to be part of that. So I'm grateful to The Chosen for doing that in this episode, which both of us are like, it's there.
You know what? Like, we're gonna run out of time to cover everything we want to in this conversation on this episode. But maybe one thing we can carry on in the comments is the final scene with Mary Magdalene, because we can't leave this episode without at least acknowledging the bizarre kind of semi-abduction scene, but it's not abduction. It's just we need you to get from where you are to where you're going. I've read a little bit of commentary about people's responses to this already, because it's a troubling scene because you're thinking what's going on. But then also, given Mary Magdalene's history, how are they thinking it's okay to put a woman of her past in a situation where she's being abducted, but it's meant to be okay, and that she would get to a point of trusting the people that are about to abduct her? It seemed like a really strange decision, and one that I don't know if they necessarily handled it in a way that is, I don't know, like it just seemed a little bit unusual to me that they tried to go down that line and make you believe Mary Magdalene would be okay with it. And then when you realize what the reveal of that is when we come to the next episode, why did you need to do that way? Like, it's a little bit unsettling for no particular reason.
Okay, Laura, that is a great trailer for the next episode, not just of The Chosen, but of Following The Chosen, because we will come back. I'm not trying to sidestep that one. You are right to bring that up. We will talk about that more in detail because of why on screen why this happened to Mary, who she then has a conversation with. And also, we should leave the breadcrumbs, the signpost glaring towards in the next episode. It's much more about Judas as well, and Judas's motivation. So all of that is coming on the next episode of Following The Chosen. If you haven't already, please subscribe and follow and like and share so we can get the conversation out there. We know everybody like us loves talking about The Chosen, from the technical to the biblical. So join our conversation, and in the comments, let us know your thoughts, feelings, reactions, including to us. We love interacting with that as well. Please, we do, Laura. We do. Come on.
We do. It's fine. You will say what you like, and we'll interact with it. It'll be great fun.
It's fine. It's fine. Thank you for joining us on Following The Chosen. We will see you next time.